The Queensland Government is going to allow granny flats to be rented out to the public to try and fix our housing crisis. My name's Luke and I talk all things real estate, renovating and financial freedom here on the channel. Make sure you like this video and subscribe down below. Let's have a chat about granny flats and what's going on in the Queensland rental market. So Queensland is going to allow granny flats to be rented as an urgent fix to this housing crisis. A change to planning rules to allow Queenslanders to rent out their granny flats will increase affordable housing stock, the state government says. Restrictions on who can live in granny flats will be removed so secondary dwellings can be rented out on the open market, the Premier Annastacia Palaszczuk announced on Friday. I know the rental market is tough and right now homeowners can't rent secondary dwellings to anyone other than their immediate family. Now, not being able to rent our granny flats in a specific local council has been around for a long period of time. In fact, Moreton Bay Regional Council decided a few years back to actually not allow secondary dwellings to be rented out to other parties. Previously, Moreton Bay had allowed a house and a granny flat to be rented out separately on one property. But the only local government area that allows granny flats to be separately rented prior to these changes was Logan City Council. Brisbane City Council no longer allowed granny flats to be rented out on a separate lease. Same with Moreton Bay Regional Council, Redland City Council. So Logan City Council was the front runner to allow granny flats to be rented to a separate party. So it looks like the state government has come over the top here and made a decision for the broader market to allow granny flats to be rented out for this interim period of time. How long this will go for, we're not quite sure. It could be 3 years, could it be 5 years, could it be forever, like some areas in Sydney. We'll have to see how this plays out and what changes this makes to the rental market. Changing this will mean cheaper properties will enter the rental market, helping thousands of people across our state. As it stands in most local government areas, only relatives can live in granny flats, the Planning Minister Stephen Wiles said. Increasing housing diversity means more affordable housing options throughout the state. That's why we're allowing homeowners to rent spare rooms and granny flats. I personally like the idea of being able to rent out granny flats on a separate lease. It's essentially subdividing without subdividing. You're building a 2-bedder or a 3-bedroom home depending on your block size, and you're renting it out on 2 leases. As long as these granny flats are up to a suitable standard in terms of fire safety, in terms of floor plans, in terms of quality of life, then I don't really see any issues with having a front house on one lease and a back house on a separate lease. I guess the councils previously were trying to avoid a shanty town where shipping containers got thrown in backyards and they were dodgy kind of granny flats. But I think there's going to be a fair bit of scrutiny on these granny flats and on these styles of accommodation. And so people who had these in place are now able to have that second lease to get in a little bit more income. And people who are looking for that affordable accommodation can now have more options and can potentially find a cheaper place to rent. So the way I see it, it's a win for the landlords who get that second lease and that slightly higher rent. And it's a win for the tenants because they get their own space and they also get more affordable accommodation, potentially in more competitive areas. Opening up the doors to Brisbane City Council, Moreton Bay now opening up again, is going to give more opportunity in more in-demand locations for those cheaper price points. It will be important to ensure standards for these dwellings so that people are safe. There will be some things to work through, but Q Shelter is confident that this measure will help housing supply. So like I said, that's going to be really important to make sure the housing is suitable and up to the Australian standard. Other changes for discussion at the Housing Summit include minimum requirements for affordable housing in new developments, while stakeholders say there needs to be significant increases in social housing levels. At least 5,000 new social housing dwellings need to be built every year for the next decade to solve this crisis, the Queensland Council of Social Service has said. Right now, we have about 50,000 people on the waiting list on the Social Housing Register and a growing number of Queenslanders presenting to community services desperately needing help with housing. I think those forecasts are probably conservative, saying that they need 5,000 dwellings a year for the next 10 years. That's only to fill the current backlog of our waiting list of 50,000 people looking for affordable housing in Queensland. Affordable and social housing is an area that I'm quite passionate about, and I've seen recent articles and talk about the apartments that were abandoned in Kangaroo Point and the developers just sitting on those block of apartments waiting to sell it to another developer to be renovated and is just letting them be squatted in at the moment. These developments which are going unfinished or are being left vacant for long periods of time, I believe should be rent out and at least put in social housing or affordable housing as long as they're up to Australian standards in terms of fire and safety. Looking at the backlog of having to build 5,000 dwellings a year for the next 10 years to fill the backlog of social housing here in Queensland, to fill that 50,000 people, I think that number is going to continue to grow. So even 5,000 dwellings a year might not be enough to meet this social housing demand. So the next level and the next step is to increase affordable housing through initiatives like this by opening up granny flats and to encourage developers to create affordable housing. Now this typically does mean compromise, where developers will do this, but they're going to be on smaller blocks in terms of houses, 300 square meter blocks, rather than the classic 400 or 600 square meters. And in terms of townhouses and units, when it comes to more affordable accommodation, we're seeing smaller square meterage rates, which means smaller dwellings, to actually make it cheaper for the builders and developers to create this product. So I guess this boils down to these changes in the granny flat rules. How are they going to affect the property market here in Queensland? The way I see it is it's going to open up the door for more affordable housing, and there's going to be a little rush, a little boom in people wanting to now build granny flats in areas that they wouldn't previously. You know, you can imagine that Brisbane City Council and Moreton Bay, it's going to be far more attractive if you've got a 600 square meter plus block to go and plant a granny flat in the backyard and make a more affordable accommodation. So you might be able to put a house down for $150,000 and you're going to get $300 to $400 a week of rent. So for the landlord, there's going to be incentive there to create more affordable housing by building these granny flats and having them, or a prefab, put on site. If you're a renter, I definitely see this as a better outcome because you're going to have more opportunity to actually get access to rental stock, and it's going to be at a lower price point because the granny flats don't quite typically have full size yards or on full size blocks. Because we see granny flats on say 600 to 700 square meter blocks on the low end, then typically these properties are going to have roughly 200 to 300 square meters of space in terms of the subdivided land or the land that the granny flat sits on. So what this means is the granny flat has less land component and more building component, and that means that people can pay less rent for those properties. I think there's going to be a real push to modular and shipping container homes, which has always been, people have tried to buy tiny homes or granny flats from China, and there's going to be a demand for that given the shortage of materials in the market at this point in time. So there's going to be a push in the modular and small dwelling space and container space so people can capitalize on this opportunity from an investment point of view. And from that rental point of view, people are going to have more choice and can potentially live in better locations. So at the end of the day, this is creating more density in our inner urban areas. Backyards, which were people having their pool and space for a cricket pitch, could potentially have a granny flat in the backyard sometime soon to bring in extra income for the current owners and make more affordable accommodation for people looking for a rental property. If I was looking to add a granny flat in a council that doesn't currently allow granny flats at this point in time, but the Queensland Government is going to allow in this near future, I'd be wary that these rules or changes could be reverted in, say, 3 years' time. So you need to be careful that if you do go and plan to build a granny flat, say in Brisbane City Council, that you have the contingency that if they flip the rules in 3, 5, 7 years to not allow granny flats to now be rented out, then you need to be wary of how that would affect your cash flows and the value of the property. Because typically when you build a granny flat, they can come at valuation or below valuation. You're not typically adding more value when you add a granny flat to a property. So just be wary of that. If you're looking at an area like Brisbane City Council, then a granny flat in the backyard may or may not be the right choice for you. But if you're already in Logan, then you can do this anyway at this point in time, and it might have been part of your cash flow strategy. So it's less likely to affect property investors or owners in Logan City Council as it is in the councils like Moreton Bay or Brisbane City Council, where you need to be aware of these rules potentially reverting at a later point in time. So let me know what you think about these changes to the granny flat rules here in Queensland. I'd love to know what you think in the comments down below, whether it's been the right decision of the Queensland Government to make these reforms to granny flat rules and to allow those separate leases, or do you think this is a bad idea and we're going to have shonky landlords and bad stock and it's not really going to work out? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Drop a like on this video, subscribe down below, and head over to purposeproperty.com.au if you're looking for a Brisbane-based buyer's agent. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.